I will move to the concluding session today, and I will invite the judges to give their reflections. The jury now has to make a decision, and if the judges can give some directions about their thoughts on whatever we have heard, the issues that the jury should consider when they make their decisions, and how best the jury can discharge their own responsibilities as people of the Netherlands. So may I call on Rasigan Maharajh first to just share your reflections more as directions to the jury.
So thank you very much. Yeah? And also to all the presentations, evidence, and engagement that we've been through across the day itself. So whilst we collectively occupy this planet, which nurtures and sustains life, what was quite obvious across the day is that our perception of what constitutes life and living is very uneven. So notwithstanding that our narrative, our real narrative, is one of shared, codependent, evolutionary development in that way. What seems so obvious after listening through today is that in our most recent past, we've lived through separate development on a world scale. Some of you may be familiar with the term separate development. Yeah? This is what constituted that crime against humanity called apartheid in South Africa. And that's what we've lived through on a world scale. The system that produces, reproduces, and consumes this narrative seems to be premised on historical processes of accumulating wealth and preserving privileges. And the instrument that seems to be used is law, the legal basis upon which we recognize each other. Yeah? But even this basic assumption of law is premised on levels of transparency and a level of equality. I've not seen the evidence of this transparency or equality in terms of what we've heard across today. Yeah. So it seems like a normative assumption, something out there in our minds that we kind of are constantly encouraged to believe in. I also like the idea that someone visits towards the end of December and delivers gifts to us. Yeah. I know about the people that slave in factories generating those gifts. It's not coming from the North Pole distributed to the world. Yeah. But that's kind of what I've felt listening to what we hear today. The evidence presented confirms almost a cynical doublespeak of the contradictions between reality and promises. And we are expected to disregard the reality and kind of, how would I call it, believe. And faith, this isn't a comment on faith the person. We have to watch between the spelling of the word F-A-I-T-H and F-A-T-E. Yeah, I'm so worried we are in the second. Our fate is staring us in the face as we hear through the evidence. And we are defaulting to faith in those stories of a Santa Claus maybe visiting us to fix things. So the complicity and culpability of governments then, acting with and for the interests of corporations, have been exposed. And as we heard even in the last testament, this is over decades, this is over centuries. Yeah. So I think it is quite necessary that we go through this veil of obscurification. Yeah. And somehow, we come to grips with the bankruptcy of a system that is destroying ecologies in seeking to expand a possibility of accumulation. But what are we accumulating if we are destroying life? And that again came across so strongly at the end. Accumulation by expropriation, exploitation is a pathway to our own destruction as a species. But in this, we are not committing suicide because we are pulling with us a huge number of living organisms with whom we share the planet. And these other life forms are not even recognized in the narrative that we tell. Yeah? So the evidence supports the view then, as in terms of what's been presented, that we cannot afford, and there's a full pun on the word afford, yeah, to persist in legitimizing the system that's accelerating climate change and bringing us closer to precarity and actually falling off the cliff. Yeah. So are the tools available to us, especially the law itself, capable of liquidating itself? Because that's essentially what we are then, proposing in terms of what I've heard. Two big questions present themselves, and these are the last 2 points I want to make. Yeah? The one is our government, and I've made that use particularly because as we've heard the judge call for the representatives of the government, we've not seen a representative appear, but something quite strange also. There's no one else that stood up to speak on behalf of the government. I assume people carry passports or at least identify documents that say they are citizens of a particular state, and no one stood up. So then that forces me to ask the question, it's not the people, it's the corporations governing us through these governments. And this is a big question about us going forward. And the second one then, of course, we've also heard, as we heard from the presentation the first thing in the morning, yeah, are corporations, agglomerations, are they collections of people? Or are they just private box numbers registered? And the only ones that have keys to that box seem to be the owners of the corporations, because no one else seems to benefit from the system, as we've heard through the evidence today. So those are the comments I'd like to share with the jury. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Can I now call upon Sharon Venne to share her reflections and what she would like the jury to consider?
Well, my immediate reaction is to get up a list of all these people that sit on these corporations and put their names out somewhere and say that these are wanted, dead or alive. There's my first reaction. I usually take a sledgehammer to things. And the former president of the United States said, diplomacy means hitting them over the head with a hammer. And then once you got their attention, then talk to them. So I think that in this kind of case, which you've heard now, 3 different indigenous people situated in different parts of the world who have been in contact with colonization. As you can see, they're bringing it home to here, to the Netherlands. It's not some place that happened somewhere else, it's happening right here. That the people today are still colonizing. They're still destroying. And everybody's responsible for that destruction. And you see the 3 different cases today. Each one of those peoples in 50 years could be the pictures on this wall. Because the destruction of their environment, the destruction of the water, they cannot live. And they will become extinct. Everybody's responsible for that. You cannot hide, you cannot pretend you don't know, because you've been told. And so what's the Dutch government going to do? They continue to pretend that their laws mean something, and their laws are to destroy, which is what they have been doing since the time for 500 years since colonization, and they continue to destroy. And the people in the Netherlands benefit from that. You could see it in the cities. You could see it all over the place. I walked around your city two days, and I see all these buildings, 16 something, 15 something, it's 1800, These are buildings that were built in the height of the major part of colonization. So you need to look at, obviously telling somebody like the person from Peru, maybe you should go to court in Peru, is not working. Same thing with the people that talked earlier. You can't use those court systems to try to promote your rights. We've tried that on Turtle Island. We have been in courts. We have been in courts a lot. We've spent a lot of money fighting these corporations. This is not the way to do it. The best way to do it with these corporations is to go after them where it hurts the most, which is the pocketbook. We found that out by hard work, and it's identifying the people who are the most beneficial and identifying them publicly and shaming them. That's one way. But I think the other thing is to also push for changes in the laws in the Netherlands, because you're going to change the laws in the Netherlands. You're going to stop them from doing it, but they're going to find some other country that's prepared to take them, and to let them continue doing what they're doing. So you have to always constantly be on their backs, so to speak. So I think you need to have long-term goals, but also in the short term, you need to identify what can you do now. How can you assess what you're doing now in order to assist in the future? Like these poor people, that man that just spoke very eloquently, I think, about the, when you take oil out of the ground like this, like we just picture here, like we're just going on here. When you take it out of the ground and it causes a disturbance and it destroys the water, the animals, the fish, the birds, everything. How do you clean that up? Cleanup of that kind of a thing it's very intense, it can be done. But we had to force that issue for cleanup in our territories. And that requires state governments to be involved in that cleanup, because the state governments have to pay for it, because the companies have scooted off. So that's how you make a country responsible then for them permitting these people if they have to pay in the future for what has been done. So they have identified, I think he said 2,000 sites in their territory. I wanted to ask him how much they estimate that would cost to fix 2,000 remediation sites. I have a rough idea of what it would cost, but say that you have the Dutch government, the Dutch people saying, we're prepared to pay that. We're prepared to pay for that remediation so that those people can live into the future. Did you see the picture of the cockatoo that was covered in oil at the beginning, or whatever kind of bird that was? It was really terrible. But those kinds of things, I think people have to start engaging in and start thinking creatively about how these kinds of things can be done. Like, I worry about what's going on in Mongolia, because when the water is gone, there's no more water. What are you going to do then? Like, did you look at those poor camels? Like, they said that their humps were supposed to carry water and they're like flat. Like, that was really distressing, for me anyway, watching that. So, I think we need to see this kind of thing that's going on and take up the the challenge that has been posed here by the people that have made the presentations. So I think as a jury, you need to kind of think, what can you suggest that can be done in the short term, what can be done in the medium term, and what can be done in the long term? Because what you heard in the Amazon, this has been going on for more than 50 years. This is not going to be fixed overnight. This is a long-term process. So we need to think along those lines, because from where I come from on Turtle Island, probably don't know, people don't realize that, but our nation our whole island got rebranded by the colonizers. They call it North America, but it's still our Turtle Island. What they did to Turtle Island didn't happen overnight, but we have to take the responsibility as Indigenous peoples to direct how it gets fixed. So that's what I'm seeing here, is that people have benefited from these companies. Like, why did they come to the Netherlands? They came to the Netherlands for a reason. They're putting themselves here for a reason. What is that reason? And then take apart that reason and redirect it. So I think, that's the kind of things that need to be considered. Sorry for taking so long, talking too much. But anyway, I'll sit down now.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for your reflections and your observations. Nick, Hildyard.
Well, I would endorse what my two other fellow judges have said, heartily. I think that I don't have more to add on those things. There are a couple of things that are reflections. I mean, this is an intergenerational court on climate crimes. And I suspect that many people in the jury will assume that a climate crime must be something to do with CO2, with carbon dioxide and the atmosphere. That's how we in the West, and indeed internationally within the Conference on the Parties, approach climate as a question of molecules, and particularly molecules that are somehow in the wrong place, too many of molecules in the wrong place. And it's actually written in to the Convention on Climate Conventions that the scientists who tell us about climate don't probe as to why those molecules are produced in the first place. They don't look at the fundamentals of what is driving climate change. It's off limits to them. They've simply got to tell us how much carbon dioxide is going to be emitted over the next 20, 30 years and how to reduce it. So we're completely blind as to the causes of our climate crisis. It's off limits to the negotiators. And that is why, I was very struck by the fact that today we have had cases brought before us as judges, and you, the jury, that have not mentioned CO2 at all. The only one that tangentially touches on what most of us here are being asked to understand as the climate crisis is the last case, which is about petrol production and gross pollution and human rights abuses. But climate is about much more than CO2 and molecules in the wrong place. Climate is about, and the climate crisis is about what actually is making it impossible for us to be able to survive. It's about our collective right to survival and what is threatening that. And that right to survival isn't just threatened by CO2, it's threatened by everything that drives capital accumulation. It's threatened by the power system that allows the powerful companies to go out to countries and completely destroy an environment, destroy a way of life, destroy not just people, but others who live and inhabit that territory. And the statute that we're asked to judge by, and here I'm I'm being a judge giving directions to the jury, if you like, does not allow us to consider a climate crime as just a question of molecules in the wrong place. It asks us to look at climate as a much broader issue than that. The climate that allows for the survival, the collective right of all of us to survival, the commons. So that's my first observation to those who might be thinking, well, actually, these cases have got nothing to do with climate. They are absolutely central to the climate issue. And I think another aspect to this that for me was really brought out is the way that by framing the statute in the way that it has been framed, how far it highlights the way that our current laws are completely biased against justice for you and I and others who lack certain types of power, unless we come together and create our own power. How the law is I mean, you know, it's the old story of the law is designed to catch small flies but not large hot wasps and hornets. We know that. We know that. But actually, the way that the law designed to construct corporations as people, corporations who have human rights. You know, a company like Shell can go off to the European Court of Human Rights and get a ruling that its rights, its human rights, have been abused. It doesn't have a heart, it doesn't have a brain, it's not a human. You know, this is ludicrous. So I think, I mean, for me, again, I would ask you to look beyond what our normal sense of rights are when judging this. You know, the rights we are looking at is the collective right of all to survival. It isn't whether those companies have purchased certain rights to be able to go and dig in the ground or whatever. It's a consequence of their being able to do that we're asked to judge today.
Thank you for that. And I will just come to the conclusion of today's proceedings by sharing my own reflections and my own things, or by throwing out things that you as jury should be considering when you make your decisions. Now, one of the most important things in any criminal proceeding is to identify who is the accused. Now, you will see that in this case, all witnesses have said that the state of Netherlands is what they hold as responsible. You saw in the last case that from Peru, that Plus Petrol has a postbox company in the Netherlands and uses that as the basis to exploit entire regions, entire nations and people, and make their environment impossible for them to live. We saw also with Mongolia how, those kind of arrangements under the bilateral investment treaties, which is something that the Dutch government claims that it has a gold standard, as the prosecutor pointed out in the morning. So I guess the difficult question for all of you as jury here is, how do you view these accusations against the state of Netherlands, of which you are citizens? Are you going to say, we are the state of Netherlands because we are citizens, as democratic theory assumes that you are? Are you going to accept that the state of Netherlands equals corporations, which is what the bilateral investment treaties do? They say, we, the state of Netherlands, put in place these treaties because that is what, they are also people, they are also citizens, and we recognize them as equal citizens. And this is a very fundamental question that you need to consider, whether you think that those corporate citizens and all of you present here are really identical, are really the same. Does Netherlands equals corporations? Does Netherlands equals people, citizens? Or does Netherlands equal, mean corporations and citizens as equal citizens? I mean, that equality of all of you here as citizens and the Dutch corporations who are also citizens of the Netherlands, do you consider these two as equal? And so in identifying, the accused, that is one of the questions that you will need to consider. The second thing is, in none of the three witnesses that we heard today, all of them in their presentations did not distinguish between something called nature in that box and something called people in another box. All of them spoke about their environment and their lives as a unified single totality. Yeah? And when we consider that, if the environment and people are an inseparable, unified, holistic entity, then in what sense are we prepared to talk about the environment? Or are we also willing to speak about the environment and people as unity? And if that is the case, how do we redefine, how do we understand this climate crisis, the environmental crisis, and the ecological crisis? And that's an important question to then think about and to answer. And that question is particularly important for all of you as citizens of the Netherlands, because the Netherlands or the Dutch government says that they are doing all this to benefit you, all of you. And they benefit the corporations, but a lot of the benefits of the corporations flows to all of you. And therefore, it's a much more difficult question for you to actually decide. And if you decide that, yes, we like these benefits and we want to keep some of it, then how many more of these images are you willing to see in the years to come? Because all of these images that you are seeing in this court of all these species here are here because exactly what is happening today happened in the past. The same Dutch government that did this thing in Amazonia and other places, did it in Indonesia, did it in Sri Lanka, did it in other places. That is why these images are here. So that is a difficult decision. Are you going to say, we don't mind another 100 images coming here, another 300 images coming here in the years to come, because we like this life, or we like a share in that benefit? Or are you going to say, no, we are not our corporations, we are people, and as people we will stand in solidarity with people and not with those artificial, legally created persons? And that's a very difficult question again. And we saw again, and that is the second question that I want to put out. And the third question you need to consider is, when we are faced with difficult situations and difficult questions, we always look for wriggle room, how to get out of that. And a common kind of way out is to say, oh, but then the Mongolian state was also involved in this. The Peruvian state was also involved. The Bolivian state was also involved. The Dutch state was also involved. And therefore, we are all, in this, and all states are whatever, and that. But then the question is, how much power does the Bolivian state or the Dutch or the Mongolian state or the Peruvian state have in creating these institutions, in establishing these laws? Can Mongolia establish a bilateral trade agreement? And if it did, how many corporations would sign up? Do they have the legal infrastructure to sign up? Because equality can be a very difficult concept. And I remember that Mahatma Gandhi once said that if you want real equality, you have to have unequal laws. And the laws are equal. In reality, you get inequality. And therefore, I think one of the things that is important to consider is Bolivia equal to the Netherlands? Are they able to do the same thing? Are they able to influence or sit in World Bank or IMF in the same way? And we saw in all these presentations that there is a syndicate of states. There is a syndicate of international organizations, and they work as a syndicate. But in this syndicate, there are certain states who are present and others who are notably absent. And majority of the states are absent. And most of them, time and time again, we saw who are the states. There is the United States, there is Germany, there is France, there is World Bank, there is IMF, there is that. And so those three questions are central questions. If the states are not part of that syndicate of states that make the laws, that establish the institutions, are you going to still say, oh, but the Mongolian, 68% of the Mongolian parliamentarians did something, or the Bolivian parliamentarians did something else? So with those questions, and after everything you have heard from the other judges, I will now ask you to really reflect on the proceedings today and give us a more conclusive verdict. So I will just give you about, let's say, 5 minutes, and then I'll open it up for...
We don't have 5 minutes, the vote is now.
Okay.
The reflection time was today.
Okay, the reflection time, I'm told, is today, now, and therefore I will now call upon all of you who think that the state of Netherlands and the corporations that about whom you have heard evidence today, and today's evidence is the state of Netherlands. Is it culpable for the bilateral investment treaties? Is it guilty of establishing a regime or a legal regime that facilitates crimes against nature, against people around the world? So that is the question. And those of you who think that the Dutch government is guilty, please put your hands up. And those who say not guilty, please put your hands up if you think not guilty. Okay, on that note now, we have a very clear verdict on this one. The judges will now go away, and when they have heard all the evidence, they will come up with their judgment, which will be made available in due course when it is published, and that will be done by the organizers. Thank you very much.